Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Urgent questions?
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. To the Honorable Prime Minister, in light of a recent statement issued by the U.S. Embassy that this country violated the Rio Treaty by allowing the Venezuelan Vice President to land here, has the government initiated discussions with the U.S. with a view to averting any repercussions?
Leader of Government Business.
And the Honourable Minister of National Security is scheduled to respond to this question. I'm respectfully asking that it be deferred later in the sitting. He is on his way. Thank you.
So the urgent question is deferred until later in the proceedings.
Questions for all answer.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, there are 3 questions on notice, and the government would be answering all 3.
Senator Mark.
President, question number 91 to the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Madam President, question refers to payments not being made to Delta Security Services for the past 2 years. Delta has not been paid for the past 2 years. Madam President, if it's any period that Delta has been paid, it is over the past 2 years. Madam President, Delta Security Services provides services to the Forestry Division. And let me go back. During the 2010-2015 period, as has happened before, Forestry Division was based in 3 different ministries, at least 3 different ministries. And on account of that, upon my appointment with Forestry Division as part of this ministry, we inherited more than $10 million in debt, some related to security services, some related to internet and other things. And we've had to try to pay down that debt while paying what becomes due on a monthly basis. So, Madam President, I would say, since, well, at least for the last year, over $1 million have been paid to Delta Security, and that has been in respect of current and debt that was inherited. And at this time, just about $380,000 are owed to Delta Security Services. But in response to the question directly, over the past 2 years, Delta has been consistently paid in respect of current and previous debt, and the ministry is now working with the Ministry of Finance to deal with an outstanding liability in relation to the current period of $388,000. I thank you.
Senator Mark.
Clarification, can the Minister indicate whether the $10 million he referred to in his statement has been reduced to a mere $380,000 at this time?
Minister.
Madam President, just to be absolutely clear, I said when I was appointed and Forestry Division formed part of the ministry, we inherited more than $10 million in debt, part of which related to security services, part to internet services, part to outstanding traveling and subsistence allowances to forestry officers, and so on and so on. It's a series of things that we inherited. And in relation to this particular security provider to whom the question relates, the current indebtedness is $388,000. The ministry having dealt with debt of $1 million in the last 12 months. Thank you.
Senator Ma.
Madam President, can the minister indicate whether debt owed for security services, traveling and subsistence, as well as internet to other agencies that would have engaged this particular security firm remain outstanding? Because he said that it was a number of agencies that were involved.
But is your question related to Delta Security Services?
Yeah, well,
which forms
I'm
the basis
responding.
of your question? Is that
Yeah,
what you're asking?
Yes, yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Minister.
Madam President, my colleague was former Minister of Public Administration and was just before your arrival threatening to return to government. I hope he doesn't. Delta Security Services does not provide internet services and does not incur traveling and subsistence on behalf of public servants. They are security services provider, the type of person you see when you go to the Caroni Bird Sanctuary. There's a white booth. There are security officers stationed there. Delta provides that services. So we have security services, Delta and other companies, internet, Flow, Digicel, traveling and subsistence, forestry officers, public officers. We've dealt with indebtedness in all categories, including security services, of which Delta is one of the providers. We've liquidated significant amounts of debt, including $1 million in the last 12 months. And for the current period, the bills that are due for payment amount to $388,000, in respect of which the ministry is working with the Ministry of Finance in its normal way to relinquish this debt. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Honourable Senators, I'm going to revert to item 8 on the order paper, and I will ask Senator Mark to re-ask the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the Honourable Prime Minister, in light of a recent statement issued by the U.S. Embassy that this country violated the Rio Treaty by allowing the Venezuelan Vice President to land here, has the government initiated discussions with the U.S. or the United States with a view to averting any repercussions?
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I apologize for being a few moments late and arriving here shortly after. Madam President, I'd like to use this opportunity to remind those listening that Trinidad and Tobago's position with respect to Venezuela has always been one of non-intervention and non-interference. This position was joined by CARICOM. This position was taken by CARICOM leaders, including our Prime Minister, to the United Nations. At the United Nations, it was the Secretary General who informed CARICOM and others that the United Nations recognizes the Maduro government. At this stage and at all stages, this administration has no horse in the race. Furthermore, our relationship with the United States continues to be a very strong one. Our relationship with the United States is one grounded in that they are one of our most significant allies. In fact, I just left security briefing where we were discussing the recent drug fine of $663 million that was a partnership between Trinidad and Tobago and the United States. The mischief that is continuing by certain persons in Trinidad and Tobago, and starting with fuel supply, when that is explained, then talking about a plane and a manifest of a plane, and now this, I'd just like to put it on record that the United States continues to be one of our strongest allies. We continue to have open channels of communication with them. And furthermore, I lay this caution that all that seems and all that they seem to be relying on here with respect to the treaty may not, in fact, be as they believe it to be. Thank you.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, can the Honourable Minister indicate whether the government of Trinidad and Tobago is conscious of a statement issued by the United States government concerning this country's violation of the Rio Treaty? Is the government of Trinidad and Tobago aware of the issuing of such a statement by the United States government?
Minister. As I have said, Madam Speaker, we continue to have open channels of communication. In fact, last week, the United States government's head and top diplomat in Trinidad and Tobago, that is the ambassador, not any underling who may or may not be speaking to the media. The United States ambassador had a conversation with me as a representative at the cabinet level of the government, and there were other conversations had, and there was no raising of the breach of any treaty. I've just put the position that all that seems and all that they seem to anchor their mischief in may not be exactly what they believe it to be.
Senator Mark.
The Minister indicate whether he's aware of the serious economic and trade consequences arising out of the breach of this treaty for this country. And in that context, Madam President, whether the government...
It's one question, Senator Mark.
Is he aware of the severe and grave consequences for the economy of this country as a result of the breach of the Rio Treaty, according to a statement issued by the United States government?
Senator Mark, I won't allow that question. We move on to questions on notice. Senator Mark, your next question.
Question number 92 to the Minister of Health.
Acting Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, the question refers to the government's decision to not support the introduction of HIV prevention drugs, pre-exposure prophylaxis. And I just want to respond firstly by saying that this is a policy the government met in place. In fact, when you refer to the period 2010-2012, the Ministry of Health policies on HIV post-exposure prophylaxis policy, it says it is not the policy of the Ministry of Health to provide post-prophylaxis for casual sexual exposure. These patients should receive voluntary HIV testing and counseling. So, Madam President, it is a policy that was inherited and that continues to be applied by the government. Madam President, towards this end, there are several options currently available to reduce the risk of acquiring or transmitting HIV, and these include the use of antiretroviral drugs to treat HIV, where treatment is an effective preventative measure. Effective treatment leads to a markedly suppressed or undetectable viral load that cannot transmit HIV. To date, 83% of all persons with diagnosed HIV infection receive sustained antiretroviral therapy, and 87% of all people receiving this therapy will have viral suppression. Madam President, secondly, the use of condoms and lubricants have been recommended by UNAIDS as it is highly effective in preventing sexual transmission of HIV. Ministry of Health provides condoms free of charge at all health centers and treatment and care sites throughout the country. And thirdly, Madam President, the use of risk reduction counseling where partners practice safe sex, abstinence, and faithfulness the third element of what the Ministry of Health does in relation to dealing with the matter of HIV/AIDS. Thank you.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, I ask through you to the Honourable Minister whether the government intends to review its current policy on the matter under review.
Minister.
Madam President, as I said, the government's current policy is the policy that was inherited from the 2010 to 12 period, and as indicated in the response, the government has continued with that policy, and at this time there is no intention to review that policy.
Madam President, through you, can I ask the Honourable Minister whether the government intends to hold any discussions or meetings with the Family Planning Association with a view of addressing their concerns surrounding this matter?
Minister.
Madam President, the Ministry of Health and the government as a whole meets with stakeholders all the time. There are ongoing relationships. The Ministry of Health is not averse to meeting with any entity, and the policy has been in existence, and as I said before, the ministry at this time doesn't plan to review the policy.
Okay. Next question, Senator Mark.
Question number 93 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President. According to the information provided by the Chief Executive Officer of the ODPM, the organization is guided by the National Response Framework, which has been enforced for many years under successive governments. The framework is a unified approach that gives direction to how hazard incidents are managed in Trinidad and Tobago. Specifically, the NRF, the National Response Framework, provides a tiered national disaster response system to be executed between two principal ministries, namely the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government and the Ministry of National Security. To this end, the ODPM's response to the December 2019 flooding in the Penal-Debe region was in keeping with the established protocols. Further, as the responsibility for managing the flooding incidents was never transferred to the ODPM, the question of inefficiency with respect to the organization's operations does not arise. In the aftermath of this particular flooding situation, the disaster management units of the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government made the assessment that the situation was a level 1 incident, which meant that it was localized and thus well within the capacity of the DMUs to manage. To treat with the unfolding state of affairs, the DMUs, the disaster management units of the corporation, apply their all-of-cooperation approach, which entailed unaffected corporations lending assistance to affected ones, all in keeping with the established protocols. ODPM requested whether any additional support was needed and were prepared at all times to gather other first responder agencies within the Ministry of National Security, in this case the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service, Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, with whom ODPM maintains constant communication. Nevertheless, on morning of Wednesday, the 11th of December 2019, when the ODPM began receiving reports from these disaster management units and did its own regional coordinating of flooding, predominantly in parts of South and East Trinidad, and in particular the Penal-Debe and Point Fortin corporations, the organization, that is the ODPM, contacted these corporations to determine what additional assistance was required. However, the local DMUs indicated that no further assistance was required at that time and that they would contact the ODPM should the need arise. So the point is, Madam President, that protocols, established protocols were followed. There are different tiers in those protocols. The first responders, being the DMUs of the regional corporations, did what they had to do. ODPM reached out to them. They said it was localized and they can deal with it. They had an all-of-cooperation approach. And at all points in time, the ODPM kept in contact with them. And at certain stages thereafter, when the DMUs asked for the additional support on the Thursday, the ODPM went in as the coordinator and provided additional support via the fire services, the police service, and at a certain stage, the air wing of the strategic services agencies, as well as the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, can the Minister indicate, in light of the severe criticisms that this organization or unit called the ODPM came under, would the minister not agree that there is need for greater collaboration and sensitization as it relates to the cooperation between the ODPM and critical stakeholders when it comes to natural disasters?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, there's absolutely no acceptance that there was any severe criticism. If there was any criticism, in particular from those on the other side, it was completely unwarranted. Personally, since I have been the Minister of National Security, we've gone through 2 sets of unusual flooding, and at all times, the ODPM has been at the forefront of working not only with the regional corporations, but with all other responders to natural disasters. We also went through, in 2018, the earthquake, the 6.8 seismic Richter scale earthquake, and that again, ODPM was part of the whole coordination. So the ODPM has been working, they've been working very efficiently. They have actually been out there carrying out training with these regional corporations, and there is, despite what those on the other side may want to portray, a very good working relationship between ODPM and all of the other bodies that respond to disaster.
Senator Mark.
Can I ask through you, Madam President, to the Honourable Minister, whether there's any intention on the part of this government to establish a legal framework for the operation of the ODPM in the future, having regard to its critical importance in natural disasters that keep multiplying in this region and in Trinidad and Tobago?
Senator Mark, that question does not arise.
Thank you, Madam President.
That's it? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on definite matters of urgent public importance.
Senator Hussain.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I hereby seek your leave to move the adjournment of the Senate for the purpose of discussing a definite matter of urgent public importance, namely the actions of the government which breached the Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, also known as the Rio Treaty. The matter is definite as it refers specifically to the visit of Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez on March 27, 2020, which the United States Embassy has confirmed is a breach of the Rio Treaty, of which Trinidad and Tobago remains a signatory. The matter is urgent given the statement by the United States Embassy on the ramifications of such a breach, as stated in Article 8 of the treaty. The matter is of public importance because the actions of this government has endangered long-standing international relationships. The government has also not been forthcoming with information about the purpose and deliverables for said meeting that would have justified the violation of the long-standing treaty. Madam President, I thank you for your consideration of this critically important matter. Thank you.
Honourable Senators, I have considered the motion and I am not satisfied that this matter as presented qualifies under this standing order. And Honourable Senators, I trust that I do not have to repeat all that I said last week in dealing with matters of this nature. Acting Leader of Government Business.
President, thank you very much. Madam President, in relation to written answer in response to question number 122, that response has been circulated. Thank you.
Public business, government business, bill second reading.
Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam President. Madam President, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, Chapter 4850, be now read a second time. Madam President, it is a pleasure to stand before the Senate today to carry on the material and important reformation of the country that is Trinidad and Tobago. This reformation involves, firstly, a dynamic, out-of-the-box approach to the reform of the criminal justice system. Secondly, an immediate attempt to save the lives of citizens who are users of the roads of Trinidad and Tobago. Thirdly, to crush the element of criminality as it passes through the arteries and veins of our transportation routes in Trinidad and Tobago, that criminality standing apart from the criminal justice system. Fourthly, to introduce new measures of technology to Trinidad and Tobago. Fifthly, to manage the continuation of the rollout of judicial improvements in our country. And sixthly, and most importantly, to assist the most vulnerable and disabled persons in Trinidad and Tobago as we carry on the human rights approach to law, which we very successfully engaged in yesterday as we passed the copyright amendments. And at this point, permit me to say, and through you to convey the gratitude of the Trinidad and Tobago Blind Welfare Association to us all for the passage of the copyright amendments yesterday. There is, of course, the miscellaneous management of harmonizing our laws, etc., and improving the certainty of law by removing the arbitrariness of some of the existing legal provisions. The bill before us, Madam President, is 27 clauses long. Those 27 clauses are divided into several subject areas. Firstly, and permit me because the time is short to dive directly into the legislation itself. Firstly, we are treating with at Clause 5 the concept of our number plates, so identification plates that are put onto all of our vehicles, which Section 12 of the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act requires us to manage. That is tied into Clause 24 of the legislation, where we deal with, that is tied into Section 24 and Clause 24 of the legislation, which treats with the management of fraud. Clause 24, which treats with Section 90 of the bill. Forgive me, let me repeat that. Clause 5 and Clause 24 treat with Sections 12 and Section 90. They both relate to the number plate system in Trinidad and Tobago, when a vehicle is deemed to be registered, what fraud consists of when you're managing the concept of registration for number plates. The next aspect of the bill, on a high-level summary, includes Clause 6. Clause 6 introduces a Part 2B, and here is where we introduce electronic registration and tagging of plates, and I'll come to that in a second. It is to birth the concept of radio frequency identification devices to every single motor vehicle in Trinidad and Tobago, and critically, it is to introduce e-registration and e-renewal. In other words, then, electronic platform improvement. Clause 23 is tied into Clause 25. Here is where we remove the terrible vagaries of how darkly tinted your car is or not. Ridiculous provision at law, which has resulted in one person at the Court of Appeal setting aside a magistrate's decision where that person received $10,000 in fines for supposedly having the tint wrong. That's only one small sliver. The real meat of Clause 25 is the amendments to the regulation power that is provided in Section 100 of the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act. It is that Regulation 100 that no other government has sought to use. And Regulation 100 is where we will allow the introduction of regulations to birth the radio frequency ID number plate system, that the RF tag IDs, and critically and importantly, to introduce into law the requirement that our differently abled people have the legal priority for parking, which they do not enjoy in this country at present. It is in that provision that we can also introduce in regulations the use of white canes for the visually impaired people, where white canes can be recognized as a symbol that road traffic users must manage. I then point you to, in a high-level continuation, to clauses 8 and 17. Clause 8 is where we introduce the special monitoring devices for speed. That is more than just the concept of a speed gun. And in clause 17, we introduce part 5B, which is the whole regime of spot speed checking. Clauses 10 to 16 treat with the need to harmonize our laws with the criminal division that we created, which includes the road traffic courts, and that obviously has some surgery to be done in how we manage the terms of law. Clauses 18 to 23 take avail of the massive improvements that we have already operationalized with the judiciary in partnership with the licensing authority and the Office of the Attorney General and the Ministry of Works and Transport, managing the rollout of an IT system referred to as TTJIM, J-I-M. That software system allows us to remove the difficulties in filing, the number of days, the specifics, etc. That platform is up and running already, due to be proclaimed and come into law in Trinidad and Tobago in its final form on May 26th, this month, 2020. Lastly, we treat with the amendment to the schedules in clauses 26 and 27. So that's the high-level approach of how the laws and the clauses in this bill coordinate with each other. Permit me to say that the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act is an act which was birthed by number 42 of 1934. That came into effect in 1935. We are nearly 100 years close. We just a short 15 years off of 100 years of operation of this law. And I'd like to say that all other approaches to birthing the radical transformation of Trinidad and Tobago, criminal justice, criminality, human rights aspect, ease of doing business, all of them have failed in large part, particularly when one considers that we spent a long time, particularly in the period 2009 to 2015, trying to create a motor vehicle authority. That motor vehicle authority, in fact, last came up before us in a bill laid in 2014, in November 2014, which was just a simple disaster bill. Why? It was too complicated, it was too thick. This government, this Attorney General, came with the position of amending the law piece by piece and operationalizing it at the same time so that we can bring in the amendments. That is why, Madam President, we specifically brought 3 pieces of law to this Parliament. We did the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2017, where we introduced the red light camera system, the demerit point system, the fixed penalty reform. That was assented to August 31st, 2017. We intend, Cabinet has already confirmed that this law will come into proclaimed form on the 26th of May this month. This particular law is directly relevant to the bill before us. We, of course, did the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Amendment Bill to treat with the registration between vans, Hiluxes, etc., their weight regulations, and also to amend the speed limits in Trinidad and Tobago, because after we introduced the speed guns, in fact, in 2016, and changed the culture of Trinidad and Tobago, we had to adjust every road speed limit by a scientific approach. The last one is this bill, which this bill, of course, brings forward RF tag IDs, the spotlight speed system, the amendments to fixed penalty positions, the human rights aspects in the regulations that we introduce, etc., in the high-level points that I've already pointed out. So this law is a continuation of the massive amendments that we have done. Stick a pin. Justice is the most important thing in this country. Killing criminality is important in this country. Crimes are committed on the road in this country. Deaths happen on the roads of this country by people exceeding the speed limit, etc. But when a robbery goes down, a kidnapping goes down, an event of crime happens, hardly ever does one jump onto a horse to make a speedy retreat or a bicycle. In fact, people will use a car, drive off in a getaway position, and then make their way. We want to track those positions, have a chance at amending our positions, introducing a number plate which has an RF tag ID feature which can identify when you pass a particular location, allows the concept of eyes everywhere, open source criminal reporting, to reach Trinidad and Tobago by technological means. Instantly, you convert the judiciary's connection to the road traffic connection, to the licensing authority, to the inspectors, to the officer on the road who has a handheld device, and instantly we are dealing with technology. This is materially relevant to the Evidence Amendment Bill. In the Evidence Amendment Bill, which we are going to bring back to Parliament out of committee shortly, that's where we use evidence from technology so that a witness does not have to step forward, give live testimony. I saw John Brown shoot Jane Brown. A CCTV camera on a red light mounted unit, on a spot speed mounted unit, can capture that evidence, and we protect witnesses. Look at the case flow in the criminal justice system. You've heard me say this many times. 146,000 cases in the magistrates' court every year. 43 magistrates in 12 magistrates' courts managing 146,000 cases. December 23rd, 2019, we removed 8,500 of those cases by decriminalizing marijuana. With the proclamation of the abolition of preliminary inquiries, which is imminent, we will remove 26,000 of those cases. With the passage of this law, together with the proclamation of the previous law that we have on the 26th of this month, we will remove 104,000 of these cases from the magistrates' court list. You know what that leaves us with? 43 magistrates, 12 magistrates' courts dealing with 8,500 cases only. Magistrates who are now district judges conducting the real work of criminal supervision as opposed to dealing with 104,000 magistrates' cases. Just a couple weeks ago, we dealt with the Miscellaneous Provisions Amendment Bill, which I piloted. In that, you will see that we have offered a 50% discount for all fixed penalty cases that are in existence, and they number approximately 80,000 cases in arrears. Why? We need to break the backlog jam. When does that come into effect? On the same proclamation, we'll be able to launch that on May 26, 2020, this month, in removing nearly 80,000 cases in logjam. Madam President, what time is full time?
10:55:41.
Much obliged. So, you're beginning to get the connectivity. You understand the location of this bill alongside the other bill. It is materially relevant to the criminal division arrangements that we created, because we created a road traffic court. It is materially tied in to the magisterial protection bill, which we just did. It is materially tied into the preliminary inquiries abolition. It is materially tied into plea bargaining. All of the laws that this government have passed in the last 5 years, all of them are interconnected 100%. And that vision of interconnectivity is what has escaped almost every single government in the past. A vision wasn't created to connect the reform. So let's go, Madam President, into the substructures that we're looking at here in the particulars of the bill. I've already given you the high-level review. Obviously, this law will come into effect by way of proclamation. That's clause 2. I can tell you, proclamation will almost be an urgent and immediate effect. Why? We have already put the pilot system into effect. We already have 2 spot speed cameras in effect. We already have the EOI and RFPs for the RF tag IDs completed. We already have the procurement processes nearly complete. They'll be finished in a matter of weeks for the RF tag IDs. We already birthed the judicial marriage with TT Post, with the inspectors, with the Trinidad and Tobago Police, with the Motor Vehicle and Licensing Division. We already digitized nearly 1 million records for cars and motor vehicle and licensing information. All of this has been done already, which is why on May 26 we can launch the U-turn system via my colleague Rohan Sinanan, Senator Sinanan's brilliant work together with the excellent technocrats and persons in the Ministry of Works and Transport and at the Licensing Division. So this is no longer the old talk, where you pass a law, you sit down on it, 20 years later you come to amend the law, for instance, sex offenders registry. That law was passed in the year 2000, not a single person went onto the registry because it was just law that sat on the books, or land laws, etc. Gone are the days where you don't operationalize law. We've done in Clause 4 certain amendments to Section 12. Section 12 is where you register a car once. You register a car once, it's tied into the regulations as well. Section 12 of the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act is tied into the regulations. There you only had to turn up, have your third-party insurance, have the inspection, you get your license plate, which is letters and numbers, and you're off. No, no, no. We are now requiring an amendment to the law where you will not only register, but you'll be required to re-register your car every 5 years. And your registration is no longer the alphanumeric number plate that somebody on the outside of the licensing division creates. No. Your registration plate is the property of the licensing authority. Permit me to stick a pin. The reason why we are able to do all of this comes down to 3 simple clauses we passed in 2017. 20A, 20B, 20C. And what do we do there? We created in those laws a conditionality position. In amending the law in 2017, we created a new Part 2. We said that traffic violations would be done. It is hereby declared that compliance with this act and other written laws relating to the use of vehicle on the road, whole of a driving permit, is a condition of a driving permit. Subsection 2, hereby declared compliance with this act, other written law relating to use, is a condition of the registration. The owner of the motor vehicle is responsible, which for matters imputable by him. We, of course, allow the owner to go behind the driver. 20B, the breach of a condition specified in the 7th schedule is a traffic violation. 20C, in proceedings for traffic violation, standard of proof is on a balance of probabilities. Those 3 simple clauses converted the excessive criminality in the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act into road traffic violations. It allows us to birth the fixed penalty system going electronically. You get your ticket in the mail, you pay for it online, you don't have to go to court. You tell the court when you want to come by fixing a notice to contest. You use less resources in the court, you save judicial power, you clear up the system. Those 3 clauses, now sections in the law, are the springboard for this. And where we put the registration plate into Section 12, we are saying now that is the property of the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Licensing regime. You are obliged not to have anybody use it fraudulently, imitate it, etc. And then we will call you in and change out your number plates. And that a failure to come in is treated with by law as well. So 2 things. Number 1, we go forward with new plates for new cars that are registered or vehicles that are newly registered. And number 2, the million cars odd, some of which are derelict and not on the road, they go in batches for renewals, and that way we will clean up the registry, because surely we don't have 1 million cars. Some of the cars that have been written off, some of the cars that have been damaged, some of the cars are no longer in use or ought not to be in use, they come off the system. So we have registration and re-registration. What we do with that is that we allow for the issuance of plates. We say the process that is to be had. We manage the re-registration process, the time frames, etc. And then what we do is we also, in Clause 5, say for how long your registration shall be valid. And that's where the 5 years comes up. And then the process for re-registration comes up. The new grounds for cancellation are introduced inside of there. But critically, Clause 6 is where we get to the electronic registration of motor vehicle and tagging. Why? Thanks to this government having succeeded in implementing electronic payments and e-filing, which go live hopefully by the month of June, you will no longer need to traipse yourself down to the licensing authority. You can do it electronically. And therefore, the platform for electronic registration and electronic payment is introduced by Clause 6. Madam President, Clause 6, of course, births the whole process of tampering, removal, etc., of the tags. That's where the RFIDs come in. It's a chip. It's not a GPS. It doesn't track you on a minute-by-minute basis. It is just like the United States system where you pass under a bridge and there's a SunPass clicker and you know that somebody has passed there. The information goes automatically to the licensing authority. Are you registered? Who is the owner? Is there any traffic violation outstanding? All of these things allow for real-time monitoring as we treat with that. Clause 7 is where we remove the obscenity of the tint and the policeman thinking that it's too dark, and that indignity of people on the side of the road stripping the tint off their car and getting a $10,000 ticket. That's gone because we marry it up into the regulation aspects. Did you say 1053? Good Lord. Madam President, Clause 9 is where we treat with, Clause 8 and Clause 9 is where we treat with the RFIDs in Clause 8. Clause 9 is where we treat with the, we're removing the references to speed devices and we're instead putting jammers and radar detectors as opposed to that, because now we're beyond speed guns, we're into the devices themselves. Clauses 10, 11, etc., as I referred to previously, is where we harmonize the judiciary aspects for the criminal division, the definitions of magistracy, registrar, etc. Clauses 13 to 16 is where we operationalize the software that the Trinidad and Tobago has received courtesy the Chief Justice's ingenious approaches in the TT-JIM system. Clause 17 is where we introduce this new Part 5B, the spot speed camera enforcement. And here I should tell you, as a result of our speed guns, road deaths are down 12% between 2015 to 2019. We have had nearly some 94,000 speeding tickets issued. In fact, that will move into a higher level of compliance because it's so easy to go. When we deal with Clause 17 and this new part, spot speed camera enforcement, I refer you to everything that I said in introducing the red light camera system. These clauses, the new section 79U onward, are almost word for word in parity with the concept and letter of law that we have in the system of red light enforcement positions. That takes you right the way down to Clause 18. Clauses 18 to 23, which treat with sections 81, 82, 85, 1, 86, 87, 88, is where we harmonize the time frames and the specifics, because we can now do this by software. The software is the TT-JIM, J-I-M system, which is the software management system of the judiciary, because today, under this government, the judiciary's database is harmonized with the licensing database, is harmonized with the police database, and they're all in one handheld device that has already been publicly demonstrated, and therefore we manage laws differently. Madam President, Clause 24 is where we repeal and replace the fraud aspects. It's tied in to Clause 5, where we dealt with Section 12. Here it is where we say that it's an offense, effectively, to have imitation plates and not manage the property of the licensing authority differently. Section 25. Section 25 looks light and small. Section 25 is where the regulatory power of Section 100 of the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act brings life to RF tag IDs, in their particular forms, because devices must be managed by regulations, the same way we did for breathalyzers and for speed guns and for red light camera. Now we get the RF tag ID regs. That process of procurement is being assessed right now. They're assessing the procurement, so therefore those regs are almost immediately prepared. We have a draft up already. But very importantly, for our differently abled people, we are insisting that disabled parking...
Attorney General, you have 5 minutes.
That for not only persons who are physically handicapped, but for circumstances. If you look to subclause B, parking for persons with a disability or other persons in special circumstances, the very aged, etc. These people have dignity of a human rights level for the first time. And today, Mr. Kenneth Surratt contacted me, asked me about the position of white canes for disabled persons, visually impaired persons, VIPs, and I have not yet responded to his message, but I can say now at this podium, the introduction of white cane regulations for the visually impaired is easily parked under Section 100 of the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act. Clause 26 amends the first schedule. That first schedule is the re-registration aspect. It springs obviously from Clause 5 of the bill, Section 15.1. Clause 15.1, where you're treating with the re-registration every 5 years, because, Madam Speaker, Madam President, you need to know if a vehicle is roadworthy in this country. It is unacceptable to have people's lives at risk. Obviously, this thing is a very minor thing. The renewal registration is just $350. You have to have responsibility. You have to have insurance on the roads of Trinidad and Tobago. Section 27, Clause 27, amends the 7th schedule. The 7th schedule came to life when we were amending the 2017 version of amendments to the law. It's tied into Section 20B that I referred you to already in that law. We're amending the 7th schedule now to add in the spot speed and other aspects beyond the red light camera enforcement. And here's where we treat with it. For instance, you see the reference to tint at Section 5 of that. And we, of course, amend the 9th schedule, and also the 9th schedule is now to be supplemented by a 10th schedule. And the 10th schedule is where we introduce the devices that imitate registration plates, etc. Madam President, this law is not textbook law. This law is radical. This law is in operation already. The proclamation of the red light enforcement demerits, etc., it's the 26th of this month. The IT, the structures, the arrangements are there. This bill before us is capable of immediate operationalization, I mean in a matter of months. Therefore, we will have adjusted the criminal justice system, crime and criminality, ease of doing business, electronic payments, judiciary and IT technology. Will be taking off the dark matter from the register, meaning vehicles which are not in the 1 million, they're written off, they're being perpetuated by way of fraud in the industry of insurance management, etc. This is radical work. And I want to compliment my colleague, the Honorable Senator Rohan Sinanan, for an amazing job at the Ministry of Works and Transport, and in particular, a technocrat by the name of Mr. Marvin Gonzalez at that ministry, and his entire team, Mr. Piggott, the several commissioners who have been in line, and especially Master Christian Morris Allen, the Court Executive Administrator, and the Honorable Chief Justice, Mr. Ivor Archie, and the Commissioner of Police, Mr. Gary Griffith, for working as a single team so that all of the databases in this country work together. I look forward to the contributions of my learned colleagues, Madam President, and I beg to move.
Honourable Senators, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, Chapter 4850, be now read a second time. Senator Hussain.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, thank you for recognizing me to join this debate on an act to amend the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, Chapter 4850. Madam President, a history of this bill shows that there was a different form laid in 2017 on the 28th of November, which included the spot speed camera enforcement. Then that bill was allowed to lapse. And on the 11th of September 2019, in this session of the Parliament, 7 months ago, this bill was brought to the Senate in order for it to be debated as a Senate bill. Madam President, one has to question what is the urgency of this matter. And I ask this simply because this Senate has been sitting back to back. We got notice of this matter just late yesterday evening, and we are asked to prepare ourselves for this debate this morning in order for this Senate to have consideration of this critically important matter that is revolutionary according to the Attorney General. And while I was listening to the Attorney General, I took some notes, Madam President, and he indicated that this particular piece of legislation is a human rights approach. And I welcome every single amendment to this particular piece of legislation that will bring some sort of relief to those disabled persons in our society. However, Madam President, what the Attorney General has failed to mention is that they conveniently remember these persons. I remember it was just last year, employees of the Blind Welfare Association were protesting because they were not paid by this government, Madam President. Madam President, you had traffic wardens in this country last year who are going to enforce the same particular piece of legislation that we are passing now, who were complaining that they were not paid for about 2 months. And this is the human rights approach that this government is taking. Madam President, the Attorney General talked about the reform of the criminal justice system. But it is under this PNM government that the criminal justice system was allowed to fall, Madam President. Madam President, trials in this country take the same time as they took, Madam President. There is no improvement in terms of trial times. Also, you see magistrates' court in this country deteriorate. They are left to rot by this government. Since the earthquake, Madam President, you have the Princestown Magistrate Court closed. You have several magistrates' courts in this country housing 2 courts. You have the Rio Claro Court housing the Rio Claro Court and the Princestown Court. You have, Madam President, the San Fernando Magistrate Court, a court that belongs in the constituency of the Attorney General, that has left to rot, Madam President, that now the High Court in San Fernando has to house a civil court, the criminal assizes, and the magistrate court. And this is the criminal justice system reform that this government is talking about. That is shameless, Madam President, for them to come and say this and boast of an achievement. The Director of Public Prosecution Office is remained understaffed. They don't have proper accommodation, Madam President, but yet they boast about criminal justice reform. Madam President, all of these cases that the Attorney General indicated that will be removed from the court system, you know, it's the same courts that run under capacity, understaffed. Those would be the same courts that would be allowed to hear these matters if somebody decides to challenge one of the citation notices. You have the Couva Magistrate Court that houses a criminal court and petty civil court, Madam President. That is complete. That is the reform that the Attorney General is speaking about. Then, Madam President, when you look at the provisions of this bill, I will get specific later on in my contribution, you will see that this particular piece of legislation adds a level of burden on the citizenry. So it's not that they're going to create convenience for the citizens, but it also increases burden. That is in terms of the registration process of vehicles. Because once a vehicle is registered now, according to Trinidad when this bill is passed, that person has to re-register his vehicle every 5 years. And on first registration, you have to pay $350. And then on re-registration, you have to also pay $350 again, Madam President. Madam President, when you look at this bill, you see that the Attorney General spoke of interconnectivity of legislation. Interconnectivity in terms of that you have electronic filing, e-filing, payment by electronic manner. You have now this spot speed camera enforcement. Madam President, all of this interconnectivity that the government is speaking about that they are going to use in order to reduce crime and the speed of the criminal justice system, but yet today crime is still at its highest, Madam President. Is that the achievement that you are boasting about? Madam President, you then see that the Attorney General spoke of the proclamation at Clause 2 of the bill. He spoke of proclamation, and this is how ready the government is. He spoke of 1 million records being digitized, and I'm sure that there are not 1 million vehicles in Trinidad. But, Madam President, there are hundreds of thousands of vehicles probably in Trinidad. I don't know the exact figure. Maybe the Minister of Works and Transport could provide us with that. But you are ready to proclaim this particular piece of legislation with 2 cameras, with 2 spot speed cameras. You have 1.3 million people in Trinidad, hundreds of thousands of vehicles, but you have 2 spot speed cameras, but you are ready to proclaim this particular piece of legislation. Then you hear that the RF tags are ready, the procurement process is almost complete. Well, Madam President, in the short time I had to do some little research in this matter, I came across some tender notices. And these tender notices, Madam President, were issued by the Central Tenders Board, and it's design, bill, and implementation of a demerit points, fixed penalty ticketing, red light camera enforcement, and spot speed camera enforcement software management system for the Ministry of Works. And this, Madam President, was issued on the 12th of July 2018, and bids were closed on the 9th of August 2018. An extension was then given from the 9th of August 2018 to Thursday, the 23rd of August 2018, a few days. And yet, we are now hearing this morning that that procurement process has not been completed, so it means that there are no RF tags currently in Trinidad and Tobago, but yet they are ready to proclaim. Madam President, imagine this government was already issuing tenders without the legislation. Is this Parliament a rubber stamp for this government, Madam President? Imagine you have no laws in place, but you are issuing tenders for projects and software without the necessary legislative framework in place. The Attorney General also always speak about plant machinery, people, and law. Well, you was missing the law, Mr. Attorney General, respectfully, Madam President. And this is the contempt we see time after time by this government in treating this Parliament, Madam President. But, Madam President, this bill, I had split it into 3 ways. 1, the electronic registration, the introduction of electronic registration. 2, the electronic tagging of vehicles. And 3, the spot speed enforcement, Madam President. So there are 3 elements of this particular piece of legislation, and I'll deal with the 3. But first, I'd like to give some background. According to the World Health Organization, Madam President, they found that approximately 1.35 million people, 1.35 million people, that's the population size of Trinidad and Tobago, die each year as a result of road traffic crashes. And between 20 to 50 million people suffer non-fatal injuries, with many incurring a disability as a result of their injury. And the WHO went on to give a lot of background and statistics with respect to what are the risk factors in terms of what will contribute to road traffic accidents. And the first one that they have, Madam President, is that of speeding. And we as a Parliament, we previously passed legislation where we amended the speed limit on various highways and roads in Trinidad and Tobago. And yes, we saw some level of reduction in terms of the number of accidents on the highways. But, Madam President, there's also another element in which the WHO identified that will be contributing factors to road traffic accidents. And it says unsafe road infrastructure. And everyone knows, Madam President, in Trinidad and Tobago, how poor our roads are, the poor road conditions our citizens have to face on a daily basis. I am reminded, Madam President, and I'm quoting from a Loop TT article dated the 22nd of March 2018, which says Moruga man dies in Barako accident. Nader Salik of Larafin, Moruga, Madam President, he got into an accident while dodging a pothole, and his vehicle came in contact with a truck, Madam President. And people will think that this story, Madam President, is something that we made up, but this is the reality in Trinidad and Tobago that our citizens have to face, that these roads, the conditions are so poor that they become hazardous for our lives and our health, Madam President.
Senator Hussain, at this juncture, let me just intervene to ask you to link what you're saying to the bill, because right now it's getting a little hazy. So
Sure.
I need for you to be a little more focused.
Sure. Madam President, I'm dealing with the part of the bill that deals with the speeding and the spot speed in terms of the deterrents that are present in the legislation in order to address speeding. And I think we must look at Trinidad and Tobago because I quoted WHO to get a global understanding of the...
So, Senator Hussain, I understand what you have said so far. So spot speeding, you've gone to the condition of roads, and then you've gone off now. You've gone a little way off from the bill. So I need you to focus a little bit more on the bill.
Thank you very much. Madam President, I was just going to my contribution as I was in terms of bringing back the statistics to Trinidad and Tobago. Arrive Alive did some very good work, and I must commend them. And I looked at the statistics, Madam President, from the reduction in terms of road fatalities. And in 2015, we saw that there was 146 road traffic accident fatalities. In 2016, there was 135. In 2017, there was 117. In 2018, 112. And there was a slight increase in 2019 to 121. So it shows that, yes, there has been a decline in terms of the number of road traffic accident fatalities. And, Madam President, we know, I am sure every one of us in the Senate would have known someone who may have been injured or lost their life in a road traffic accident. And I would not put the Senate through this in terms of calling names, but, Madam President, we have to face the reality that our roads are a dangerous place in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, this bill specifically now also deals with one aspect of revenue collection in terms of the breach of the traffic regulations. And in terms of the spot speed and the breaching of red traffic lights and speeding, Madam President, this is a way in which we cause persons to act in a certain manner to deter them from acting irresponsibly on the road, but also government raises revenue through traffic violations. And I have an article here, Starbrook News, dated the 16th of September 2019, where the judiciary showed, Madam President, that a total revenue collected for a 5-year period stood at $170 million that were paid through traffic offenses and violations. The number of tickets paid stood at 172,769. So you see the number of violations we have on the road compared to 289,140 tickets that were handed out by law enforcement officers. And at the end of 2017-2018 law term, the judiciary stated that the total number of new cases filed in the court were 165,154, of which 120,875 were traffic cases. So you see that the majority of the cases in the criminal justice system that were filed in the year 2017-2018 were traffic cases. So, Madam President, I say this to show that we have a lot of errant drivers who will violate our traffic laws and our traffic regulations in Trinidad and Tobago. And yes, we must deal with them. We must deal with them. But, Madam President, we can't just say that we are going to pass a particular piece of legislation when we don't have the infrastructure in place in order to properly deal and enforce what we are doing here. So, I also looked, Madam President, at the Ministry of Works and Transport website, and it spoke of the red light camera system. And it was very detailed, and I must say that the Ministry of Works and Transport, their website, has been up to date with respect to this particular piece of legislation, notwithstanding that the legislation has not received the approval of the Parliament. But there's a pilot project, Madam President, and the pilot project recorded an average of 4,000 red light camera violations from one red light intersection, with an average total of 48,000 annual red light breaches at the said intersection. And I believe, if the minister can correct me, I don't know if this is the camera that is located on Wrightson Road. And Madam President, that is one of the busiest intersections in terms of pedestrian traffic in Trinidad and Tobago. You have a lot of persons, especially blind persons, who will use that particular intersection in order to access what the Parliament used to sit there. You also have the water taxi services, Madam President. So it shows that we need to deal with this problem. We identify that there is a problem. 4,000 red light violations. One alone, Madam President, can take several lives. One red light violation. So yes, we have to deal with it. And Madam President, I was very happy that the ministry would have done this pilot project. And I would like the Minister of Works and Transport, maybe when he is contributing, if he is, to this particular piece of legislation, to just give us some more insight in terms of the pilot project. And if the other camera that was set up, because there are two cameras, the Attorney General said, whether or not that one was also used as a pilot project. I don't know if that is the camera that is located in the vicinity of where previously Flavorite Ice Cream Factory was, because there are cameras set up there. Now, the Attorney General also indicated that this bill will deal with that obscure issue of tint, because the legislation as currently exists on our law books leaves some room for some level of inconsistency in terms of how do we interpret what is an obscure view in terms of in a vehicle. Now, I know when you go to any tint shop, Madam President, in order to install tint on a particular vehicle, the tint can be classified in terms of a percentage. There are varying percentages of tint. And I just happened to speak to Senator Rohan Sinanan over the floor, and he indicated, yes, that may be the move in which the government is taking in which to regularize the tint laws in terms of what will be the legal percentage of tint that a person would be allowed to install on their motor vehicle. Now, there's another part of the bill, Madam President, that I wish to deal with, and this has to deal with the RF tagging. Now, the RF tagging has existed in several jurisdictions all over the world, and that happens to occur in countries. I looked at Canada, I looked at the United States, and I looked at the United Kingdom. And Madam President, if you would allow me, there was one article that I looked at that was a CNN article, and this is dated the 18th of July, 2013, and it's entitled, ACLU Raises Privacy Concerns About Police Technology Tracking Drivers. So, what it says, Madam President, is that the police were recording the license plates of passing drivers and storing that information for years with little privacy protection. And the ACLU refers to the American Civil Liberties Union. And Madam President, they said that the police surveillance, after they reviewed, they found 26,000 pages of material gathered through public records in 600 local and state police departments in 38 states and the District of Columbia. And what they're saying, Madam President, is that the police was using these RF plates to track certain individuals, and there was not any protection available to these individuals, so that the police or any authority can in fact misuse the data in which they collect with the movement of individuals. Now, when you have this RF plate working, Madam President, it means that on the person's vehicle, there will be an electronic tag. And set up all over Trinidad and Tobago, there will be the RF receivers. So once a vehicle enters into that vicinity where the receiver is, it means that that vehicle will be identified. And on that vehicle, a person's personal information will now be available to the authorities based on whether or not they committed a traffic violation. So I would agree that the number plate is of public knowledge, but Madam President, what the literature has shown is that once the authority now is able to access your personal information, then we will be entering in some choppy waters in terms of privacy issues. Now, I have some questions in which I would like to ask to be cleared up. Where will this data be stored, and who will have access to the data? And for how long are we going to store this data? And what are the restrictions on the use of the collected data? In terms of the protection of citizens, can this data be used in terms of for criminal investigation? And if it has to be used for criminal investigation, is the police required to obtain a warrant before they can get this information? Because I would not like to think that the government will have any authority or any body accessing this information, especially the political directorate of the country, because everybody will appreciate that there is that level of misuse that can happen because of the surveillance data that can be accessible by these individuals. And when you look at what happened in the United Kingdom, Madam President, there's a body called the Information Commissioner's Office, and there was a complaint made by several non-governmental organizations with respect to privacy issues. And this was the same thing because there was a small town, Madam President, called Royston, and they made a complaint to the Information Commissioner's Office in terms of using these monitoring devices in their town. And if you would allow me to read from the press release dated the 24th of July 2013, it says, "It is difficult to see why a small rural town such as Royston requires cameras monitoring all traffic in and out of the town 24 hours a day. The use of the ANPR cameras, which means the automatic number plate recognition cameras, and other forms of surveillance must be proportionate to the problem it is trying to address. So after detailed inquiries, including consideration of the information of the Hertfordshire Constabulary provided, we found that this simply wasn't the case in Royston. We hope that this enforcement notice sends a clear message to all police forces that the use of ANPR cameras need to be fully justified before they are installed." So there must be some level of proportionality when dealing with this. And when you look at the bill as drafted, there are no limitations or restrictions in terms of the use of the information, Madam President. So that is one thing I would ask to be cleared up. When you look at Canada, in Canada, the Privacy Commissioner expressed concern, Madam President, that there's a growing police use of technology to spy on motorists. So these are real situations that occur all over the world, Madam President. And these are countries that have more resources. They have more resources than us, and their law enforcement is probably more expedient than ours. And we have to learn from their experiences because this is something new to our jurisdiction. So while it may all well and be good to have more stricter enforcement on the roads in terms of detection for traffic violations and errand drivers, you have to have the protections available to citizens. Because if this particular piece of legislation and this collection of data is misused, Madam President, it will be an invasion of privacy of citizens, Madam President. And that is a serious issue that we need to have addressed in Trinidad and Tobago. Because, Madam President, when you look at the attitude of this government, you would find that they have tried their very best, Madam President, to water down our privacy rights in this country. They have passed income tax legislation, Madam President. They have passed interception.
Senator Hussain, you have 5 more minutes.
I'm obliged. They have passed interception of communication amendments, Madam President, all in a manner we have seen that is very dangerous, Madam President, in which they are trying to get all of the information from citizens. But when the citizens of this country ask the government for information, it is always about secrecy and dark clouds, Madam President. So it shows the inconsistency and the hypocrisy of this present administration in terms of the way they deal with the citizenry and the rights that are available under the Constitution to all our citizens. Madam President, we believe on this side that this bill offers some level of enforcement in terms of road traffic violations, but we as a parliament have to work harder in order to better this legislation, Madam President, because there are certain provisions in the legislation that requires amending. There are certain protections that have to be included in terms of privacy rights and data protection rights in this country, because we have seen, Madam President, that our data and information in this country is not properly protected. We have a Data Protection Act that has not been fully proclaimed. And these are the submissions that I would ask the Attorney General and the Minister of Works and Transport to consider, Madam President, and I thank you.
Senator Thompson-Aye.
Thank you, Madam President. And forgive my long walk, not to freedom, but to the podium. It is with pleasure that I stand here to contribute to this bill, entitled the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2019. The explanatory note of the bill is, I paraphrase, to provide for the electronic registration system for all motor vehicles registered on the coming into operation of the Act, and to provide for a system of speed detection cameras. I agree that it is rather innovative, and I will go through the clauses, we will see what I mean. Now, the first amendment is to Section 12 of the bill. I must say I would have preferred to have a marginal note, which occurs in some places of the bill. It is helpful. So Clause 4, which amends Section 12, speaks of the registration and re-registration or renewal of registration of vehicles. It repeals subsection 3 and substitutes a number of sections. An owner who wishes to register or renew the registration of his vehicle shall apply to the licensing authority in the form prescribed by the licensing authority, pay the fee set out in the first schedule, provide proof of payment, and provide proof there's enforced a policy of insurance, and so on. And on the licensing authority being satisfied that the provisions of the insurance, motor vehicle insurance, third-party risks have been complied with, they will register the vehicle in the appropriate register and assign a unique identification mark and enter particulars in the register and issue and affix registration plates. Now, I've often wondered, what is the system? Because nowhere does it say for the registration, the allocation of registration numbers. What is the sequence? Is it a chronological one or otherwise? You see, I have come across instances where there are particular numbers. In fact, the attorney who presented me to the bar almost 38 years ago always had one number for his vehicle, 69. His explanation was that was his regimental number because he was a police officer. And I know that some people have as their number their birth dates. Now, if it is that you can, in fact, have a choice of number to satisfy your urging for various things, then, in fact, this can be a source of revenue for the government, that you request a particular number and you make a special payment for it. Of course, you cannot request PM1, and you know why. Now, registration is very, very important because it identifies the vehicle. When you look at the bill and it talks about the registration plates and so on the vehicle, it is very, very important. The provision that says that you cannot, in fact, 5B, a person who without written authorization from the licensing authority makes or causes to be made or issues registration plates for use on a vehicle commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $25,000 and to imprisonment for 3 years. This is tied also to another provision in the bill, and it speaks about a person who with intent to deceive makes or has in his possession anything resembling a registration plate or purporting to be a registration plate and so on, commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $25,000 and to imprisonment for 3 years. Now we know what happens. Your car is stolen, and it may appear on the road with a completely different license plate. I remember some years ago, my neighbor's car was stolen, and by some quirk of fate, it appeared in the garage to be attended to by the same mechanic who had worked on her vehicle. There was a different registration number. But because he knew the vehicle, he was able to call her in, and they were able to call the police in, and the story had a good ending. She was able to recover her vehicle, despite the wrong number plates. So this question of having number plates on the vehicle which identifies the vehicle will always be important. There was another case that I recall where someone's car was damaged right in St. Augustine by the supermarket. So she came out of the supermarket, and there was a damage to her vehicle. And on the windscreen, there was a note, and that note was a registration number. And because that registration number was there, she was able to go to the licensing office, find who was the owner of the vehicle, and show up at the person's door. Now, the driver of the vehicle, when she saw her and she was told what she was about, her first response was, "How you find me?" So the person who was a good Samaritan, who had seen something and said something, and we were able to follow up the registration number, which is very important, that was of great assistance. So the licensing authority has the authority, and it continues, although it's not reprinted here, but it is still a part of the legislation, that you can supply to any person applying for a copy of the entry on the register on the payment of a prescribed fee, provided you show that you have a reasonable cause for requiring such a copy. So you can go and get a copy of someone's particulars, and you will be able to tell who is the owner of the vehicle. So that's a very useful provision in the legislation. Now, this bill also provides for re-registration of a vehicle. So you register it, and then you have a provision for re-registration. And when you look at the provision, you see that there is a time period. There's no time period, but you're told that you are going to be warned by publication in the Gazette and 2 newspapers in daily circulation requiring you to present your vehicle to the licensing authority to have an electronic tag affixed to it. Now, I am sure you will remember what happened when there was a time period for inspection of vehicles. And I would ask that in putting or fine-tuning the regulations, that we allow sufficient time so that persons, and have sufficient, places and so on, so that persons can go and register their vehicles. It makes no sense putting a short period of time, and then what you find happening is that the places, you have long lines and people are all, there in droves, and then you cannot do it in time, and you have to extend the period, and extend the period, and extend the period, and then some people still have not complied. So it must be a reasonable time, having regard to what needs to be done. Now, the electronic registration of motor vehicles and tagging is extremely necessary. It will go a long way in solving crime. We have had many instances of stolen vehicles. We have had many cases of people being taken away in their vehicles. So when you have this electronic reading device, and you have the electronic tag, and you have someone who gets into a vehicle, and the person is driven away, then it will help to a large extent in having not only the vehicle recovered, but in saving the life of that person.
Senator Thompson, just 1 second. Honorable Senators, I think you're all aware of the rules that apply to when we're in this chamber. So whoever has that device going, could you please take it off?
Thank you. So that electronic tag is encrypted and embedded with an electronic security code that is unique to the vehicle. It provides a link to the registration information contained in the registers under Section 11(1) in respect of that vehicle, and is capable of producing an electronic record of the information in the registers when the electronic tag is read by an electronic reading device. And each vehicle is going to be fitted with that electronic tag. So it is an offense for a person if you use or cause or allow to be used by another person a vehicle that does not have an electronic tag affixed to it, if you remove or destroy an electronic tag unless authorized by the licensing authority, or you tamper with or otherwise interfere with the proper function of an electronic tag. And on summary conviction, the fine is $25,000 and imprisonment for 3 years. Now, what happens if it's done on more than one occasion? Perhaps the regulations can make provision for that, because we tend to be a rather stubborn people. The same thing with regard to the putting the tint on the vehicle. Sometimes the police officer takes it out, and then again, the person puts it back again. So we need to look to see if the crime is committed successively, that the penalties can be increased. Now, the provision for cancellation of registration is one that worries me, because when we put legislation on the books, we have always to make sure that it is something that works, something that makes sense, so that if somebody is complying with the necessary prerequisites of the law, one expects that the authorizing body or the responsible body will also do their part. So you have a system here in this law for registration for a period of time. So after 5 years, you have to re-register. Is it in all cases that's going to be practical? I'll tell you why. I had occasion to take a vehicle abroad. I took the vehicle abroad for over 5 years. All the necessary prerequisites were complied with. All the payments were made and the car was shipped. But because it was a European car, and where I was working at the time, there was no provision. I mean, there was great difficulty in getting parts. I said, you know something, I'm going to bring the car back to Trinidad. So I brought the car back to Trinidad, went through all of the things, all the hoops they made me jump through. I'm not athletic, but I did jump through all the hoops and complied with all of the regulations. So I was waiting for the new registration number. And Madam President, to my surprise, after days of up and down at the licensing office, I was told, you know, we never took the car off, you know. So you could just put back your number and go your way. I mean, it really is mind-boggling, some of the things that we have to go through in this country. So that if you have a system in place, make sure that it works. Make sure that when people comply, that in fact, you are also complying, so that people are not frustrated by trying to do the right thing. I would like to thank you. I think you know my predilection. So I would like to thank the drafters for tidying up in Clause 16 the untidiness in the explanatory note, because I can no longer say that the grammar needs to be corrected because you caught it in time, which is Clause 16 of the bill, would amend Section 79Q by deleting the words at the date, time, and address specified in the citation notice, and substituting the words at the date, time, and place or method as notified by the District Criminal and Traffic Court. So, of course, I had a difficulty with the prepositions and so on, but it has been fixed by putting or in the manner notified by the District Criminal and Traffic Court. So I thank you for whoever was responsible in that legislative committee for tidying up that error. Now, the spot speed camera enforcement, we know, we have seen the cameras, and it really is causing a shift, a change in behavior. It's been said that, you know, you put the laws in, but people do not change behavior. In fact, behavior has been changed with the seatbelt law, and now, you see, when people see that camera by Rising Road, and when we were coming out, when we were in the other place, and you reach by Hyatt, and you see the various cameras, people are alerted that they must, in fact, slow down. So it is helping. Because we know the pain and suffering. Senator Hossain spoke about people losing relatives and so on and friends to motor vehicle accidents. And 28 years, 8 months, and 21 days ago, I lost my mother in a road traffic accident. And it's still very, very much something that I remember. So anything that can improve how we drive on our roads, and of course, fixing the roads as well, so that the minister has come in for some praise for some of the things he's put in the legislation, and we hope that he will also be dealing with fixing the roads as well. With regard to the parking for disabled persons, or parking for persons with a disability or other persons in special circumstances, really and truly, I thought it was part of our law. Because in many places, I see disabled parking, and I see the places empty. And when I do see someone going into that park, I said, I'm going to stand here, and I'm going to see if that person who comes out of that car is disabled in any way. Of course, my family members say, please don't get involved. You know, but sometimes just looking at the person, if that person has any common decency, and it has happened, they will withdraw and look for another park. So putting it in the law now is very welcome, because you see it all over the world. And if we can comply with the law in different parts of the world, there is no reason that we cannot comply with the law here. So this is a very welcome provision that we have put into the law here. So there are many other provisions for sanctions, and they are all an advance in the law. I would ask that we please look at our regulations very carefully when we are drafting them to make sure that they are practical, because many times we do things that are not practical for our society and our culture. I do not mean that we must comply with our bad habits, but that we must make sure that it is something that we can comply with and make the law enforceable. So I thank the mover of the bill, the Attorney General, for bringing this bill to Parliament. And I hope that the licensing authority, that in fact has not had a good reputation in the past, that they will be brought on, some kind of heavy manners to make sure that what needs to be done or what needs to be taken out to stop the corruption will in fact be put in place. It is a long journey. This bill has been amended, this act has been amended several times. And in addition, I must say, to whatever we publish in the Gazette, make sure that when we put it in the daily newspaper, that it is prominent enough so that people can recognize what the law is. I have had occasion to be called over by the police because I drove up Cora Road at a time when I had no idea that the law had changed, and you could no longer go up Cora Road at a particular time. And when I challenged the police, they said that the law had been changed, it had been gazetted, and it was nowhere else. So make sure that whatever you do, that people are fully aware. When I looked for the sign, it was behind a tree. So nobody could have seen that sign that says, don't go up the road. So again, let us be practical in putting that law, whatever law, put it into operation. Because you cannot put a sign behind a tree and then subsequently you expect people to be able to see that sign or expect to see it in the Gazette. So please, let us be practical. Let us do things, because in the main, people want to comply with the law. So I thank you for this bill, and I hope that before too long, it will in fact will be implemented, but with all of these safeguards that I have spoken of today. Thank you.
Madam President. And Madam President, I thank you for the opportunity to contribute on this bill. And I am honored, Madam President, to be the Minister of Works and Transport at this time in this government, where in the history of this country, since our independence, this government would have demonstrated the commitment towards modernizing our road traffic laws and the licensing division. Over the last 5 years, this government, Madam President, have indicated the importance of the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act to protect our citizens of this country. Madam President, the bill that we're debating today may seem to be a simple bill. It's 27 clauses, looking at 4 different areas. A new vehicle registration number plate system, a spot speed camera enforcement system, new regulations for the use of window film tints on motor vehicles, and a parking permit system for persons with disability and other special needs. However, Madam President, we did not just pull this out of a hat and decide to come today, as Senator Hussain tried to suggest. Why now? This was a part of a journey that started a long time ago, I think 2009. And what we were able to do over the last 4.5 years was to take up from a position that we found. What is that position that we found? Sometime in 2013, the then UNC government took up the rails left by the previous PNM government to attend to the Motor Vehicle Authority. What happened then? In 2013, a bond was raised for $300 million. Eventually, they were able to raise $345 million. And that money was supposed to use to create the Motor Vehicle Authority and to modernize the licensing authority. Unfortunately, after $320 million was spent, we were nowhere closer to achieving the goal. When we came in and I was appointed minister, there were about $20 million remaining in that fund. That $300 million at the time, $345 million, was to create a head office and 6 additional offices and to modernize the licensing authority. What we ended up with was just a building in Caroni that could not be used at the time, and nothing was in place. What we set out to do with the $20 million that remained was to try to bring as close as possible a modern licensing office in Trinidad and Tobago that could be on par with any developed country. And you would think with $20 million that might be impossible, because what we found is, going forward, a request for additional funding, on one instance, $165 million to build additional building in Arima. And the entire process was shut down because of the lack of funding. What we were able to achieve going forward was a planned system where we decided to open one office in Sangre Grande, upgrade our existing facilities, get the Caroni facility up and running, and gradually upgrade all the services at the licensing department. What we were able to achieve in terms of the technology and the improvements at the license office was this decentralization and production of certified copies in both Trinidad and Tobago. I remember coming into the ministry, and there was one office that you could have gotten a certified copy at the financial buildings. And if you had a request in Tobago, you'd have to go to Tobago, they'll have to put the request down on the boat, print it in Trinidad, and maybe 1 month after you get it in Tobago. And that happened throughout Trinidad. We were able to decentralize that, and now you can go to one of 6 offices in Trinidad and get your certified copies immediately. You can even go online if you don't need a physical copy and check your information. We implemented a new driver's permit with machine readables and state-of-the-art security features. Introduced an online driver's permit and verification system where citizens can immediately access through drivetT.com verification on a driver's permit or vehicle registration records. All that is needed is a smartphone and a data service. We have introduced a new computerized and randomized system for distribution of our number plates to eradicate corrupt, related, and special numbers which citizens were prepared to pay bribes to public officers for special numbers. Yes, people were paying bribes at the license office to get those special numbers that was referred to by the previous speakers. Not everybody paid bribe, I must say. Some genuinely got the numbers, but a significant amount had to pay bribes for those numbers. That no longer exists because there's a computer that generates the numbers, so nobody knows what number you get. However, and I'll speak about that later on, the new RFID plates will allow you to get a customized number. Now you'll be paying the state for it. So the state will get that money. But we'll touch on that later on. Madam President, we are near completion of the digitalization of all vehicle records at the licensing division, which will soon make way for the rolling out of more online services, especially the registration process of all vehicles. In other words, we are hoping that very soon, and we are actually doing a pilot project once we open back from the COVID pandemic, where new vehicle companies, the new vehicle salesmen will not have to come to license office. License office will be going to them using technology. We have changed the regulation to allow light goods vehicles to undergo inspections at private garages around the country, thereby reducing congestions at the license office sites around the country. And this was a bold move by us, because we had in excess of 150,000 light goods vehicles to inspect every year. And with the best efforts, you could not even inspect 10% of that. However, what we found is that a significant amount, maybe 75 to 80%, were getting the license stickers. And we were wondering, if you can't facilitate the inspection, how on earth the vehicles could have the stickers on them? We have moved to digitalize that department, and what we did is that we allowed the private garages to inspect them. So whereas before we had just 3 inspection bays in Trinidad, we now have in excess of 60 to inspect these vehicles. We have established a new traffic enforcement center at the licensing division. This new unit will administer the new demerit point system, the red light camera enforcement system, the new fixed penalty ticketing system. This unit is staffed with a highly trained staff who are vetted thoroughly in a rigorous process by the Ministry of National Security before assuming their position. We have designed and deployed the U-turn software management system that connects TTPS, the judiciary, the licensing division, the TT post, to allow seamless flow of information, with the new traffic enforcement center playing a lead role in administrating the system. Madam President, never in the history of Trinidad and Tobago has such connectivity among key agencies been accomplished. It is the first of its kind in the Caribbean. We will bring into full effect the new demerit point system and fixed penalty systems. by May 26, 2020. We did delay this because of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, on May 26, it will be the law in Trinidad and Tobago. Very soon, the country will witness the rolling out of a number of online services at the licensing division in light of the dramatic change to life as we know it due to the current global pandemic. The platform we have laid will allow the seamless business continuity at the license office division by allowing citizens to transact business with the license division without having to physically visit any of the site. This is where we want to reach with license office. You only go to license office if there's a problem. Most of the services should be able to be done at home online. That is where we're heading. We also improved the physical infrastructure of the licensing division with the construction of a new license office in Guayco, soon to be open. We have improved the ARIMA licensing office, and very soon we will start the construction of a new license office in ARIMA, not on the site that was purchased by the previous government, on lands that belong to the Ministry of Work. As a matter of fact, the land that we sold to the, that was bought by the government then have been transferred to the AG office. And all this, Madam Speaker, was achieved from the 20 million that remain from the bond. We saw information at the ministry where they were going to apply for additional 300 million to accomplish this. Madam President, the bill before us just has 4 areas. And if I'm to go to these 4 areas, the first one is the RFID, as we call it the RFID, which is really the digitized number plate. That, as Senator Hussein spoke about the security aspects of it and the protection of citizens' information, and I'll leave that for the Attorney General to address. Senator Hussein spoke about the procurement process, and so I think Senator Hussein was a little bit confused. The ministry did go out for several tenders. One was the U-turn system, another was the RFID plates. And he also said that there were only 2 cameras in Trinidad. I think, again, Senator Hussein is confusing the red light cameras with the spot speed cameras. They're 2 different types of cameras. What you have at on Ryson Road is a red light camera. If you go to El Socorro, you go down to the highway, you go to Trin City, you will see spot speed cameras. And we intend to ramp up these cameras to have them in several locations. And with the technology now, you can have both spot speed and red light on the same camera. We are looking at that as the technology changes. What we anticipate with that system is that it will eradicate a lot of the crimes that takes place with false number plates, because this new number plate system has embedded in it a chip that the law enforcement agencies can pick up a car, and this will tell you if the car, as the senator said, the color of the car was changed. I don't think people understand that if you paint a car, if you change the original color of a car, you're supposed to report that to the license office. It's not a practice in Trinidad. So that information of the original color of the car will be on the chip. And law enforcement agencies will be able to identify all the infringements on that car. You will not be able to just pull up in any shop, buy a number plate, put on the number plate, take it off when you reach home, put on another one. So this has a lot of law enforcement advantages to it. And what it will do, it will help the license office on their registration. We have in excess of 1.1 million cars on our registration. A significant amount of them may not even be on the road. As the senator again said, her car left the country and it wasn't taken off the register. That's not supposed to be so. We found several cars with the same number plate on the register. This will eliminate all of that. And in terms of the inspection, Why we said every 5 years? You have to inspect your vehicle. You have to re-register every 5 years because you have to inspect your vehicle. So this re-registration now with the technology will be done just as you go for your inspection. So there's no challenge. And the system is set up in such a way that new cars registered will get the new system and gradually will roll out on the existing cars, calling them in an orderly manner. And when they go for the inspection.
You have 5 more minutes.
Okay, so let me just go to the other clauses on the bill. Madam President, we had the tint, and what was surprising to me is that in 2017, I spoke to one transport commissioner, and I asked him, how do you identify a tint, which is too dark or too light? And to my surprise, he looked at me and he said, well, I look at the inside, and if I could identify if it's an East Indian or an African, this is his words, I use that, and then I determine if the tint is good or bad. Immediately, I called Mr. Marvin Gonzalez at the ministry, and I said, hey, draft some legislation. This can't continue. You can't be subjective like that. And going forward, we will have different percentage on your tint. And the Transport Commissioner has the authority to vary that if you have a personal a problem, meaning health-wise or for security reasons. And you can only tell somebody that their tint is too dark if you use a meter to measure it. So no longer will you have to be subjected to a police officer telling you your tint is too dark, and there's no way he can measure that. I was shocked when the Transport Commissioner told me that at the time. Immediately we tend to address that. In terms of the parking, we had a lot of consultations with a lot of stakeholders. And we think the time is right now that we respect the differently able in this country. And we are not reinventing the wheel. This is, in most first world countries, we respect this. And we feel in Trinidad and Tobago, now is the time to implement it. You will have to get a medical report, obviously, to access it. But once you access it, and based on the consultation we does have the authority to vary the length of time you'll have this disabled parking. Madam President, I would have loved to have the original 45 minutes to talk on the license authority, basically where we are going with that. Unfortunately, we're all limited to the 20 minutes. I just want to say that the systems we put in place here are not revenue earners. Road safety has nothing to do with revenue. It's about saving lives. And just before I came to the podium here, I got a text from Ms. Sharon Inglefield. And her plea is that she would really welcome every sitting member support this legislation, because this is not about revenue. It's not about putting pressure on anybody. This is about saving lives. It's about road safety, and it has a lot to do with security and respecting the differently able in this country. Madam President, again, I wish I could have gone on to say all the good things that are happening at the license office. We all accept the fact that the license office have been a place where nobody wanted to go. But I don't think we can stand here without saying to the staff at the license office that there have been no improvement. There have been a lot of improvements at the license office, and I hope that we continue in that direction so that we can bring a lot more relief to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Madam President, thank you very much for the opportunity to join in this debate for this bill, which seeks to amend the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act. I think it's important at all times in the House, when we do things, we have to put it in perspective. So while Minister Sinanan was there speaking and rattling off all the things that have been done, that long list of things that he says has been done, I messaged a friend in a WhatsApp group to say I'm speaking next. And the friend responded, "Good, I hope tomorrow we have no traffic on the roads." And that is the point. You see, while we do all these things and make all these amendments. Since 1936, this piece of legislation has been amended no less than 100 times. And while that has happened, the traffic on our roads has gotten worse. So we are good at making amendments to the legislation, but we are very bad at dealing with traffic. And that is the real problem that is facing the public out there, Madam President. And I would ask, what has this government really done about the traffic situation in the last 4.5 years? I know Mr. Sinanan will want to jump up and say, well, look, the Currap overpass has been done. And the overpass is beautiful. I commend him on that job well done. The overpass is beautiful, Mr. Sinanan, but not so quick. Because on Sunday, I went by my mother on Mother's Day, and I drove on the road, and driving on that piece of road is like driving on a trampoline. The car was jumping all over the place. It is the worst piece of paving I have seen on a new road in a long, long time. And I hope that if the minister shares my view, he finds a way to have that corrected, because it is unsafe and something has to be done about it. Madam President, every day, of course, during the non-COVID times, we have a mass migration taking place in this country of persons coming north and persons going south, bumper-to-bumper traffic from as early as 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m. in the morning until all hours of the night. The effects of this traffic on citizens, where they have to face 3 to 4 hours a day stuck on the roads, is unacceptable, because the repercussions are many. It affects their mental health. People are stressed, people are tired. It affects their family life. People don't have time for their spouses. They don't have time to recreate. They don't have enough time to spend with their children so that they could discipline them, that they could look after their homework, that they could have proper family bonding time. The traffic in the country affects our work productivity very significantly. And you know, Madam President, at this time in our history, when we could no longer rely on our oil and gas revenue as we once used to, this issue of lost work productivity as a result of traffic is very, very important. We need to pay attention to the fact that our ease of doing business ranking has been steadily falling. From 2010, where it was 81, in 2011 it went to 97. It came down in 2012 to 68. It came down in 2013. It went up 1 to 9. Came down significantly in 2014 to 66. In 2015, for some reason, I don't want to go into the reasons because I don't want to draw too much of fire right now. This is my first time back in this house for a while. It went back up to 79. 2016, 88. 2017, 96. 2018, 102. 2019, 105. And 2020, 105. So the government has not been doing very well as far as the ease of doing business in Trinidad is concerned. And that is something very, very important.
Senator Lala, if I may, the act that we're amending is the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act. But the bill that is before us is very specific on certain aspects of that act. And I would ask you to focus a little more.
I am guided, Madam President. And I was just about to come back. and say we need to focus on the issue of traffic because of lost productivity. You know, we have seen that speed cameras have been installed in many places throughout the country. But so far, I'm sure the public will agree with me, Madam President, that it is a joke. Because while they are all over the place, they are non-functional. So you have a situation where contracts are being given out, money is spending, someone is benefiting, probably laughing all the way to the bank, but not the public, because the public is deriving no benefit from the cameras, which are non-functional. When you pass by Arangwes on the highway, you used to see the camera flash. Non-functional, but it's flashing, serving no purpose. The flashing has now stopped and it's now dead. And we come into the House now to pass more legislation. The same thing with the speed guns. A lot of money spent to equip the police service with the speed guns. And yes, at one point in time, there was a lot of brouhaha, and they were all over the place. Featured in the press very often, persons getting charged. Now it has died down again. So we're moving away from the speed guns, it appears, and now we're moving towards something else to spend money on, and not dealing with the real issue, which is traffic. But the point is that having failed to deal with the traffic problem, if, Madam President, we seek to further burden the public by finding new ways to take money out of their pocket, we need to do it in a way that is fair. I really hope, I really hope that this legislation is not a new way to take money out of the pockets of the public, because they really can't take any more. It seems as though every day we're finding a new way to tax them either directly or indirectly. But if this new way to tax them indirectly is really going to be put into effect, it must be done in a way that is fair. And you see, the point is, when you go on the internet, Madam President, and you look, you would see that many cities throughout the world have realized that spot cameras is a way to raise easy money. A lot of money is raised very easily throughout the world using spot cameras. And if that is what we're doing, if the main aim of this legislation is to raise money, then I think we're being misguided. But again, I say, if we're doing it, we have to be fair. And I want to draw attention, and I'm happy that the Honorable Attorney General is here, to what is going to be Section 79 AG and AI of the legislation. Because the point, Madam President, is that spot cameras have been recognized as being not foolproof. They do malfunction. If you go on the internet and you do searches, you will see that that is a common problem with these type of cameras. And if one were to read what is 79 AI at page 23 of the bill, one would see that in the bill, it is recognized that these cameras would malfunction. 79 AI reads, in proceedings for a traffic violation under this part, evidence of the condition of the spot speed camera or the manner in which it was operated shall not be required unless evidence that it was not in proper working condition or that it was not properly operated at the time of the violation has been adduced. So it is recognized in the legislation that the camera might not be in proper working condition or may not have operated properly. But the question for the citizen is, if I'm being charged for an offense, and if I think I was not wrong, and I'm being improperly ticketed, the question is, how do you get evidence to show that the camera was not in a proper working condition or not operating properly, as is set out in 79AI? The point is, Madam President, if it is accepted that speed cameras make mistakes, and the legislation does that, is it fair to put evidence of possible malfunction out of the reach of the citizen? If this is done, the aim then is really just to take citizens' money rather than to be fair to the citizen. Madam President, if the real aim of this legislation is to reduce speeding, as was said by the Honorable Attorney General and the Minister of Works and Transport, if the aim is to reduce speeding rather than raise revenue, as I am suggesting it might be, then you cannot make it impossible for the citizen who was not speeding to prove his innocence. You cannot make it impossible for the citizen to prove his innocence. To be fair, there must be some way that the citizen can access evidence to show whether the camera was operating properly or not, and to show whether it was malfunctioning. And you see, it comes back to something the Honorable Attorney General said in his opening, and that is that this government is committed to taking a, quote, human rights approach to law, and that justice is the most important thing. Well, if that is the case, then the scheme of this legislation has to be revisited. There must be a provision for the camera to be checked and certified and a record kept and preserved so that the citizen is able to access evidence to show whether the camera was working properly or not. And we don't have to look too far to find that. If we look at Section 62 of the present Act, Section 62(6)(b), in relation to speed guns, 6b reads, Madam President, before using a speed measuring device on any day, a constable shall satisfy himself that the device is A, in a satisfactory condition, and B, properly calibrated so that it indicates speed readings within a limit of error not greater or less than 2 kilometers per hour of the true speeds, after which the constable shall enter into the device his name, regimental number, and the speed limit of the area where the speed check is to be conducted. So in relation to speed guns, we are imposing on the officer the obligation to ensure that the equipment is working properly and that information is preserved for the benefit of the person who may be charged. But we are not doing it in relation to the spot cameras.
Senator Lala, you have 5 more minutes.
Very well. And that is something that needs to be looked at. Similarly, Madam President, in relation to Section 20G, which is found at page 10, there's an issue in relation to the gathering of the photographic evidence and its preservation. And that is something that needs to be clarified. Perhaps when we go to the committee stage, I would raise it with the Honorable Attorney General. And you know, importantly, yesterday when I sat here, I heard the Honorable Attorney General speak about the efforts that the government has rightly committed to quote-unquote digitizing the work that the government is to do on the citizens' interactions with the state. And that is commendable and important. But here in this legislation, we're still speaking, as shown at 20E at page 8 and 4F at page 4, we're still speaking about communicating with vehicle owners via the Gazette and 2 daily newspaper publications. Whereas when we go to 79B, AB at page 19, we're speaking about communication through email. The point is, we are now in the modern age. Communication is very easy. People have email addresses. We should move away from this method of communication, this archaic method of communication, of publishing in 2 daily newspapers, for hoping that people would see the information that is pertinent to them. And I want to suggest, because I believe it was Minister Sinanan who raised the issue about personalized number plates. I think as we find ways to look at other methods of raising revenue in the country, of course, something is going to be very important, and that is branding Trinidad and Tobago. What is our brand? And I believe so far an opportunity has been missed to brand Trinidad and Tobago via number plates. And we don't have to look too far to see how this is done. The United States, you see it in all the 50 states. So for example, in Florida, the number plate says the Sunshine State. That is the brand for Florida. New York, the Empire State. That is the brand for New York. Texas, the Lone Star State. What is Trinidad and Tobago's brand? That is something we need to pay very important attention to if we are to capitalize on a very easy and important way to market who we are. Who do we see ourselves as in the eyes of the world? What do we want the world to see us as? And I think that that is something the Ministry of Works and Transport would want to look at. And just finally, before I depart, Madam President, a short while ago, it was circulated to us a proposed addition to the bill, a Section 26, to add a Section 106A, a Clause 26 to add a Section 106A. And that seeks to bring the court system into the working of the legislation. And it allows the Rules Committee to make rules with respect to, and I have concern in relation to C. It says the Rules Committee may make rules with respect to C, all other matters necessary to give effect to this act. Well, I think that has to be an error, because all things necessary to give effect to the act is a matter of government policy, and that power should be the remit of the minister responsible for transport. So, in closing, Madam President.
Mr. Lala, your time has finished, has expired. Senator Dylan Remy.
Much obliged.
Thank you, Madam President, for allowing me to join this debate on. Thank you. for reminding me. So you're not sure where to wear a mask or where not to wear a mask, Madam President. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to join this debate on this bill and act to amend the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, Chapter 4850. The Attorney General identified some of the benefits of this bill that will include saving lives, crushing levels of criminality in the Division of Transportation, introduction of new technology, managing the rollout of changes in the judicial system, and assisting the vulnerable. Madam President, there's enough reason to bring legislation like this to deal with crime and criminality, specifically with respect to the use of vehicles. Recently, a friend was called by the police and asked if she owned a vehicle with license plate so-and-so. This person was asked, where was that vehicle? And she was able to say the vehicle's outside, parked in my garage. And the officer said to her, your vehicle has been involved in a criminal activity several miles away from where that person lived. And she said, but how could it be? My vehicle is there. And that was the result of her license number being stolen and used in another vehicle that was being used for committing a criminal offense. So I am well aware of the issues that are right now plaguing us in terms of the use of the vehicles for criminal activity, and I do welcome a bill like this. Madam President, Clause 4, subsection 3B, refers to assigning a unique identification mark to be carried on the registration plates of a vehicle. And I understand that that unique, that on the vehicle. Clause 4, subsection 3C, 4A, says a registered vehicle shall have affixed to it registration plate bearing the unique identification mark. My question is, how is this affixed? And is it that the plate cannot be detached from the vehicle? And I'm not saying deliberately, because there is an offense created if this is done deliberately, but accidentally, or if that plate is stolen. Is that going to, how is that being dealt with? Madam President, Clause 6 of the bill introduces a new Part 2B entitled Electronic Registration of Motor Vehicles and Tagging. I welcome the new system of electronic registration and re-registration of vehicles. The Minister of Works and Transport, however, must ensure that the system that is put in place for the electronic registration must be well maintained, and we must make sure that there's enough backup and redundancy in the system so that we would not be caught with issues relating to crimes being committed and they cannot be detected, because this electronic system that we have in place, that we are placing so much dependence on, would not be available for seemingly good reasons, like the system going down. In our situation, that may be a seemingly good reason, but it is not when so much of the systems are tied up with this electronic system. Madam President, I refer to Section 20G, subsections 1, 2, 3, and 5 of the bill. And like Senator Saddam Hussein, I too am concerned that checks and balances to ensure that a person's privacy is not violated. The data gathered from this RFID system must be used only for what is intended. And the Attorney General, we must be specific as to what that data obtained is to be used for, and not for anything else. Madam President, I will also refer to Clause 24, subsection 4, where it talks about that you have a liability for using a vehicle with a license plate that has a specific specific things on it that will prevent the system from being identified by the electronic cameras. I'm just asking, what would happen if I have a rented vehicle and I am not, let's say, savvy with the systems that are put in place for the types of types of number plates. According to this bill, if I am using a vehicle like that, it may not be mine, I would be liable. And I would also ask, is this the RFID system? Would it also be attached to the, in other words, they had RFID system, from what I understand, the bill said. It was on the vehicle, but the vehicle, the body of the vehicle can have the system in it. So if the vehicle, the engine and stuff like that is removed from the vehicle, how is the system, the ID system, tied up with that, the engine number and chassis number, etc.? Madam President, also, if the vehicle is damaged, how is that going to be tied up with the RFID system, with the license plate, etc.? Madam President, I'm usually brief with my presentation, and I would just say to the Attorney General that I do appreciate this bill, and I really do think that it has an opportunity for introducing very unique and important systems into our management of the road traffic and the systems that we have right now. And I would welcome his contribution, feedback, during the committee stage. Madam President, I thank you.
Senator De Freitas.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to lend my voice in support to the bill that is before us, which is the Act to amend the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, Chapter 4850. Madam President, I think thus far what we've been hearing today in relation to this bill is that most people, in some form or fashion, support what is before us, simply because of the potential for the huge impact that this bill could have on something that is used by everybody above the age of 18 in Trinidad and Tobago, which is the road network and some sort of a vehicle once they have a driver's license. Madam President, it has been said by other speakers before me that what the bill treats with is really and truly, in a nutshell, the electronic registration and tagging and then the use of spot speed cameras. What I would prefer to do in my contribution is begin by treating with some of the concerns and comments made by other speakers. One of the first ones made was by Senator Hussain and subsequently by Senator Dylan Remy in relation to the privacy and the RFID tags that would be used on the license plates of vehicles. And what I would say to that is, as the human race and the planet moves forward with technological advances, we find that the idea of privacy in the manner raised by Senator Hussain and Senator Dylan Remy is becoming somewhat less and less in that regard. And I use the example of the smartphones which we all have. One of the first things that you figured out once you acquire a smartphone is that a lot of the apps on that phone tracks your movement in a manner that is much greater than this RFID tag would on your license plate. It is not something that we think about, but it's there. So much so that I've seen many warnings on social media indicating to individuals how to turn off the location services on their cell phone. And I'm saying, as much as the concerns raised would be valid for anybody, the fact is that we've been living in that world for quite some time now, where you're dealing with privacy and how much privacy one really has. But is that a reason to not implement this bill and to not implement something that has such a great potential to deal with criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. And I use the example of something that we've dealt with almost 10 to 15 years ago, and which we've seen in the last year or so in relation to kidnapping. I remember the story that was in the papers, I think it was last year or the year before, of the young mother that left home and the father making a plea for the perpetrators who would have kidnapped his wife to return his wife for the sake of his children. And the story went that she was kidnapped in her vehicle and disappeared without a trace. And when we look at this bill and the clauses that speak to the use of RFID tagging, all that would have been required to solve that case would have been someone to have seen the number plate of the vehicle. The husband could have very well called the relevant authorities, given them the number plate. They would have been able to use the RFID tag and identify the last hit on the system as to where that vehicle was. And that particular case might have had a very different outcome. So I understand what Senator Hussain is saying, and I understand Senator Dylan Remy when you speak to the privacy that must be maintained when dealing with RFID tags and the ability to locate vehicles somewhere in Trinidad and Tobago. But we have to balance that with the positives versus the potential negatives. And in Trinidad and Tobago, to me, the scenario that I just outlined is a much bigger positive than the potential negative and concerns that you've raised. Madam President, I want to respond to Senator Lala, who spoke to this bill and the fact that we should be speaking to productivity. And he indicated that with the kind of traffic that we have in the country, which affects our productivity, I just want to disagree with that to a certain extent. Why? Because to me, for as long as I could remember, up to the very last time I renewed my license, anything to do with licensing office, be it registration of vehicles, be it registration of new vehicles, be it registration or renewal of your license, that was a whole day event. You had to take a day off work. It didn't matter if you went as soon as the licensing office opened. You knew in the back of your mind that you would be spending an entire day in the licensing office just to get those things done. And if you listen to the Attorney General in his piloting of this bill, one of the things that he said was that this system that we're setting up is going to be able to move us in an online direction. And so I humbly disagree, Senator Lala, when you indicated that this would be a problem for productivity because we're still dealing with traffic. To me, I say here today that once we get the system up and running, that once we get it online fully and modernized, that productivity in this country will go up because no longer will you have to spend whole day in the licensing office to do anything. You will be able to stay at home in the morning before you go to work, probably while you're eating breakfast, online on your computer and re-register your vehicle. And because the foundation is being laid here today in the bill, I go as far as to say, hopefully, sometime in the future, you would be able to renew your license online. And once that document is submitted online, you can have that license mailed to you through TT Post. So that the productivity that is lost because you are taking time off work to go to the license office to do any number of activities, because we are moving everything online, starting with the registration, electronic registration of vehicles, that productivity will actually go up. So I humbly disagree, Senator Lala, with that sentiment that you were putting there. Madam President, one of the major points that has come out today that this bill is going to be able to do is to continually put a downward pressure on criminal activity that surrounds the use of the road network and vehicles in this country. Senator Dylan Remy just spoke to her friend having to deal with a particular issue directly related to duplication of license plates. We've heard in this bill by speakers that have gone before me that the licensing authority is going to be responsible for license plates in this country, meaning that any kind of corruption that could have taken place, the ones that we've heard about and the ones that we've not heard about. We heard Minister of Works and Transport speak to bribes. All of those things will be a thing of the past as it relates to the licensing division and anything to do with motor vehicles and the road network. We will not have that issue anymore. So the downward pressure on criminality will be real, it will be effective, it will be consistent. And that is what we promised as a government coming in 2015, that one of our mottos, one of our mantras, and one of the things that we will achieve is to ensure that we in every aspect eradicate corruption at all levels. And this bill speaks to just one of those instances where we can do that. The electronic registration of vehicles that leads to the re-registration that will be taking place every 5 years. One of the things that that does is it ensures that the system is always up to date with the owners and the vehicles that they own. I have heard of instances with the old system where someone may sell a vehicle, and of course we understand that transference needs to take place as laid out in a particular process at licensing division. But for some reason, that process may be delayed. And so you have situations where a vehicle is sold and the new owner of the vehicle is not on the system registered as the owner of that vehicle. And what that re-registration does every 5 years is it ensures that situations like that never occur again. And that is very important. Because what happened to Senator Dylan Remy's friend when those license plates were duplicated, or when you don't know who the real owner of a vehicle is that that person can engage in any kind of criminal activity in this country and is effectively hidden, because the only piece of information that the authorities have to go on is the license plate number, which is attached to an owner who has nothing to do with the vehicle and the activity that that vehicle was involved in. That is why this is very important today, to understand that for some people they may be thinking, well, that's just an extra step I have to go through now, where I have to re-register this vehicle every 5 years. But the positive of that is very, very good. And if I am to paint the picture of this entire system, Madam President, from the spot cameras to the electronic registration to the tagging, it will go something like this. You purchase a vehicle, you register your vehicle using the new electronic registration system. The vehicle is tagged with the RFID. The license authority gives you your plate. That is attached to you as the owner. All of the information is there. You encounter a roadblock a few weeks later. The police is able to use their electronic device. They read the tag. They know that Senator Sobers, for example, is the owner of this vehicle. As the Minister of Works and Transport alluded to, they know that the color is blue. They're seeing that the color is blue. And they know that he is the rightful owner of the vehicle. If anything in that information is off, they now have just cause to go further in investigations to question the individual driving that car. So had Senator Sobers, just using him as an example, gotten his car stolen a week after purchasing it, and that person got stopped in a roadblock, then the very upgraded driver's permit that was done several years ago that we know people cannot duplicate. When that person, if they have a driver's permit, gives it to the police officer, the information on the tag versus the information the driver is giving does not match. So when Senator Lala speaks to that this is about finding new ways to raise money, I again humbly disagree. Because with this system, which is perpetually enforced, meaning you don't need actual bodies all the time to enforce, it's perpetually enforced. It means that Senator Sobers would not have lost the money he put out when he purchased the car. He would get his car back. And you have to think about it from that standpoint. And I will go even further, Senator Lala, by saying, and I think everyone knows this, surely the Minister of Works and Transport knows this, that not everybody under the old system that gets a traffic ticket in Trinidad and Tobago pays that ticket. So it's not about finding new ways to make money, but it's also protecting the citizens' property so that they don't lose money, but more importantly, stopping leakages inherent in the system that have been going on for too long. And in this economic situation that we are facing, these things are important.
Senator De Freitas, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. So I will wrap up, Madam President, by saying that another positive of the bill in front of us is one that has been said time and time again. The ability to change the behavior of those that use our road networks and their vehicles on the road. We have NGOs in this country that speak to that time and time again, one of them being Arrive Alive. And because this system is perpetually enforced, with spot speed cameras, with tagging, with everything else that the bill speaks to, it means that people now have to think when they enter their vehicles how they use the nation's road. No more drag racing, no more speeding. Another point in relation to productivity is that you now need to leave on time so that you're not speeding to get to where you need to get to. Because in conjunction with the other bills that have been passed towards this, like the demerits point system, it means that you can leave Toco Sandy Grande, go to Port of Spain, and lose your license before you get there. And it's not about a police officer stopping you, because there's a system in place that will see every light you've broken, and demerit points will be racking up as you move along. And therefore, you have to think more carefully about how you use the road. As long as you change your behavior, there should not be a problem. And we shall have a system that works quite effectively towards the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, with those few words, I thank you.
Senator Sobers.
Thank you, Madam President, for recognizing me to contribute to this bill before us this morning. Madam President, let me first say that I do agree with many of the sentiments expressed this morning by senators on all 3 benches that the road traffic situation within our country is a very serious one. It's one that would always and constantly require some degree of attention by the government, by stakeholders, NGOs, in always trying to educate our population and educate our road users to be more responsible when they are utilizing the nation's roadways. As a matter of fact, Madam President, as recently as this morning, within The Guardian, there was an excerpt from an article, or an interview rather, that was done by the head of Arrive Alive, who called for more caution and responsible driving and actions of road users within our country. That even though we are being faced with this pandemic, and that many persons, once they leave their homes to conduct lawful business, should respect the laws and the legislations of the road, should respect other users on the roads. And even though persons may attempt to hustle to find themselves back at their homes subsequent to conducting their lawful business, they should take their times so as to avoid getting into any serious accidents. Permit me, Madam President, before I actually jump into the bill itself, to make two light comments. When we, in Trinidad, whilst preparing for the bill last night, I was questioned by an individual as to what we were going to be doing tomorrow within the Parliament. And when I informed the person that I was going to be looking at something relative to the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, as comical as it may sound, the first thing that jumped out of the person's mouth, well, of course, it's an election year. Anything to do with road traffic would require some degree of paving. And they were seeing a lot of activity being done, and so they linked the two, and I had to correct them on that. But more specifically, I can comment with respect to planning, reviewing bills that would come before the House, that in terms of conducting any type of research, I take my time. I speak to persons who I believe to be experts in a particular area or field. And so for me, albeit that this particular bill would have been on the order paper for quite some time, it was a little bit disheartening to know that we had to rush and review and prepare to be able to present in a comprehensive manner for this morning. Because at the end of the day, the beneficiaries of these pieces of legislation that we treat within this August chamber, the end users, are ultimately the public. So I was a bit disappointed in a person who I consider, or I jokingly refer to as Uncle Senator the Honorable Clarence Rambarat. Where, right? He knows that I often tell him that he is referred to by many other persons on the outside as the uncle within the Senate, you know? So I was a bit disappointed. But in any event, I spent the time and I prepared, and so I'm here. So getting into the bill itself, at page 4 of the bill, I looked at clause, which would be considered the new clause 5B. And there's a penalty now being looked at for persons who may be in possession, or persons who, actually the clause speaks to persons who without written authorization from the authority makes or causes to be made or issues registration plates for use on a vehicle, and that person would commit an offense. What I would have liked to see, and maybe consideration for an amendment to that particular clause, is that individuals who may very well be in possession of these plates without permission from the authority, they should also be caught by that particular legislation and be penalized accordingly. Because there may very well be persons who are farming out these plates to commit illegal activities, robberies and whatnot. And if the police conduct a raid on the home of an individual engaged in such activity, and a license plate is found, and he does not have permission to be in possession of that plate, he should find himself also being caught by the ambit of this particular legislation. I also looked at clause 12, page 4 to 5, and this deals with the clauses 12 and 13, which deal with the registration, rather, of persons who may be in possession of the old plates. So the plates that we all have affixed to our vehicles. It gives an instruction that persons would automatically have to have those plates re-registered with these new electronic plates. But in terms of reading the section itself, I don't see that there's a time period instituted here for when those persons should change these new plates over. And I'm thinking then that the cost as well too, we should consider the cost to be a bit minimal, at least less than what is prescribed at the back in terms of $350, because there are many persons who still drive on our roadways with very old vehicles, and there may be persons who may find it extremely difficult, one, to find themselves at the recognized or the registered places to have the plates changed over, and the cost of itself is a factor that must be considered as well. I looked at clause 8, which is located on page 6, and this deals with a penalty. Well, it speaks to a person who after the 5-year period does not re-register with the authority itself. So it says where the registration of a vehicle remains expired for a period of more than 30 days from the date of expiry, the owner shall be required to re-register the vehicle in accordance with the requirements under Section 12 and Part 2B. Under the parent legislation, Section 15.3 actually prescribes a penalty in place for someone who operates a vehicle that may be considered to be derelict or damaged and should not be on the road, so it's not roadworthy. This particular section, I think it would tie squarely into some of the comments made by Senator De Freitas, wherein if you have an individual who may very well be on the road utilizing a vehicle with expired plates, after that period of time, that 5 years and 30 days, that person, there should be a penalty in place or in force to treat with that errant individual. The way in which this particular section reads, I am not getting from it that there's an actual penalty in place. And juxtaposing the actual penalty that is in place under the parent legislation under Section 15.3. So maybe at committee stage we can have a discussion about that as well. I also had an opportunity to look at page 8, which would deal with clause 20E4, which deals with some of the penalties as well too, but I wanted to specifically look at clause 20E6. And this deals with a person who fails to comply with placing the tag, the registration tag, the electronic tag on their vehicle. So there may be persons who continue to drive with the older plates and they have not switched to the electronic tag plates, and there's a penalty in place for that person here, right? Especially after it is gazetted and whatnot. And when you read further down at clause 5, it says, for the purposes of subsection 1 above, the licensing authority may cause to be published in the Gazette and at least 2 newspapers in daily circulation in Trinidad a notice requiring an owner of a vehicle to present his vehicle to the licensing authority to have an electronic tag affixed on it. And I'm simply saying that when we're considering that individual, it shouldn't be, it sounds to me that it is quite strict in terms of what it requires the individual to do. And I'm thinking that it should be amended to include without that the person who fails to comply without reasonable cause with a notice under subsection 5. Because there may very well be instances where the individual may not be in the jurisdiction. The individual could be ill, he or she could be incarcerated as well too. And to have them pay this penalty and they have a reasonable cause or an excuse for not so doing could be very harsh. I looked at clause 20F as well too. 20F2, which is lower down on that same page 8. and it deals with the licensing authority may authorize a constable to carry and operate an electronic reading device. My question is more logistics wise, where I'm inquiring. I may have or I may not have heard the AG in piloting the bill, the Honorable AG in piloting the bill, indicating how many of these devices we do have presently, the cost that was associated with these devices, and whether or not we had sufficient training for our police officers who would be utilizing these devices on the roadway. I also looked particularly at Clause 20G and Clause 20H. Now, a lot has already been said, I think, by Senators Hussain and Senator Dylan Remy, and also Senator De Freitas on these two particular clauses. Now, my understanding of this particular section is that there is a significant benefit to be had from these electronic IDs and the way in which the camera system would be able to pick up on the ID of the vehicle once it passes through a camera so stationed to do. And I agree with Senator De Freitas that if there is an incident and a report is made, police officers can act in a real-time manner to track the vehicle and possibly apprehend the individual who's committed an offense. This occurs in many of the states within the U.S. As a matter of fact as well, too, I am also aware that in some instances, let's say a crime has been committed very close to one of these cameras itself. An individual may have been involved in a shooting incident, and there's no evidence at that point in time specifically tying the individual to the shooting incident. And some statements suggest that the individual may have been around that vicinity at 9 o'clock in the morning on X day. The police can use the camera system to determine what possibly if there was a violation that occurred around 9:05 on that particular day, and they may very well be able to get an image showing this assailant being engaged in the shooting, and that picture could very well be used in evidence against the individual at a trial in a criminal matter. But my issue with 20G and 20H is actually, it touches and concerns what Senator Hussain indicated. The procuring of the imagery itself, I think there should be some safeguard that is put in place. In the U.S., in order, this system in most states is part of a national security database wherein police officers can access the database to procure these images and utilize them accordingly in the prosecution of offenses or in the search of a kidnapping or a stolen vehicle, or even if they believe an assailant is committing an offense and they have the vehicle registration that the assailant is utilizing, they could procure hits, GPS hits, as to where the vehicle may very well be in an attempt to arrest the individual. But in all of those circumstances where the database is accessed, there is a safeguard. In some states, it is as rigorous as having to procure a warrant before you actually utilize the database system. And in other states, it's a simple safeguard test that the police officer who is in charge of managing the access to the database would simply require the investigating officer to say that an offense has been committed, an offense is about to be committed, or an offense is being committed.
Senator Sobers, you have 5 more minutes.
Yes, please, Madam President. So that I'm simply wondering whether or not, because at the end of the day, this information, this data is going to be used in any proceedings. And as I've just pointed out, it could be used in proceedings related to the red light traffic system, the system itself, as well as it could be utilized in other criminal proceedings against individuals involved in other illicit activities, which, I have no objection to on the face of things. but there should still be some safeguard put in place to ensure that the individuals who manage access to the database do not arbitrarily utilize the system itself. I also looked at page 19, and I guess we could touch on this as well too, or treat with it properly at the committee stage. Clause 79A(b)(b), and that deals with the service of the citation notice. The service of the citation notice. So clause 79A(b)(b) says that the citation notice can be served by sending it by way of normal post or registered post to the owner at his usual or last known place of residence or business. Now, when it comes to service of documents, there should be some proof that the document was in fact served. And generally, within civil proceedings as well too, we use registered post because there's a signature that has to be had, and there's tracking that can be elicited from TT Post itself to demonstrate that the document was actually served. But when you utilize normal post, there's no footprint to indicate that the document was actually served. So the person could simply say that they never received the citation notice, and hence the reason they never paid the citation itself. So I would like that to be changed just to simply reflect the registered post. And when you read lower down at 79A(b)(2), it speaks to if the person's address cannot be ascertained, that you are going to have the circulation in the daily newspaper. And I agree with Senator Lala that we are in the 21st century and we should be able to utilize electronic transmission through email. The difficulty is the way in which the particular section reads. If you aren't aware as to who the residence of the owner, how are you going to procure the email address of the owner to actually send them the citation notice via email? So that I think maybe that particular section, electronic transmission, should be shifted to Part B in 79A(b)(1)(b) and should be removed from 79A(b)(2). Because if you don't have the actual address of the person, there's no way you're going to be able to ascertain the electronic email address of the person as well. I also looked at 79AD2, which speaks to the restriction. It speaks to the type of defense that a person could utilize in terms of defending this citation, and it actually limits the defenses that can be used by an individual when they file this notice to contest the citation. And I think that it should not be a case where we actually legislate what type of defenses persons could utilize in terms of furthering their own defense in their own matters. There are many other comments that I have listed here. I will definitely raise them at the committee stage. I would like to end by indicating that I think, again, we should utilize any opportunity subsequent to sober reflection to lend our voices, to encourage persons to operate responsibly on our roadways. And it matters not how many times we come here to get it done. Once we are able, through legislation, to possibly save and preserve a life on our nation's roadways, it is something that should be commended. And I thank you very much, Madam President.
Honourable Senators, the sitting will now be suspended and will be resumed at 1:45 p.m. On the resumption of the sitting, Senator Dial Singh will be the next senator to speak.